Left my husband after his terminally ill ex-girlfriend asked him to father her child, and he actually considered it. Hello, Reddit. I never imagined I'd be here, sharing my story with strangers on the internet, but I feel like I need an outlet because my entire world has just crumbled around me. I've been married to my husband, Daniel, for 5 years. We had what I thought was a solid marriage, one built on trust, love, and respect. We had our ups and downs, just like any couple, but we always worked through them. At least, that's what I believed. Then, out of nowhere, his ex-girlfriend, Sophie, reappeared in our lives. And with her, she brought a request so outrageous, so shocking, that I still can't wrap my head around the fact that it even happened. She wanted Daniel to father her child, her final wish before she passed away. And the worst part? He actually considered it. Sophie and Daniel dated years before we ever met. From what I knew, their relationship had been intense, but ultimately short-lived. They broke up long before I was in the picture, and while they stayed in casual contact, she had never been an issue in our marriage. I never felt threatened by her because, frankly, I didn't see any reason to be. That changed the moment she called Daniel and asked to meet up. He told me about it afterward, sitting on our couch as if he were discussing something as simple as a dinner invitation. She has terminal cancer, he said. She doesn't have long. My heart clenched at the news. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. But then, he told me the real reason she had reached out. She wants me to be the father of her child, he said, looking at me with those eyes that always made me weak, only this time, they weren't filled with love. They were filled with uncertainty. Indecision. I blinked. What? She wants a baby before she dies, he continued. And she wants it to be mine. She said we could co-parent until, and then you and I would raise the baby together. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. Waiting for him to say, of course, I told her no, or can you believe she even asked me that? But he didn't. Instead, he sat there, watching me carefully as if trying to gauge my reaction. You said no, right? I finally asked, my voice sharp and edged with something I couldn't quite place. He hesitated. I told her I'd think about it. It felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. My body reacted before my mind could fully process his words. My chest tightened, my stomach churned, and my hands clenched into fists. Daniel, are you kidding me? He sighed, rubbing his temples. Olivia, it's not that simple. She's dying. This is her last wish. I don't know if I can just shut her down like that. You can't be serious, I snapped. This isn't some favor you're doing for an old friend. This is a baby, a whole human being. And you want to bring a child into the world under these circumstances? It's not like that, he said defensively. I wouldn't be abandoning the baby. We'd raise them together. We? The audacity of him to act like this was something I had any say in, like this was just a small bump in our otherwise normal marriage, sent me over the edge. No, absolutely not, I said, shaking my head. This is insane, Daniel. You don't even want kids right now. We've talked about this. I know, but this is different. How? I demanded. Because it's her? The words hung in the air between us, thick with unspoken accusations. That night turned into one of the worst arguments we had ever had. I was furious, not just because he hadn't immediately shut Sophie down, but because he was acting like I was the one being unreasonable. As if my refusal to entertain this madness made me the villain. I can't believe how selfish you're being, he snapped at one point. Selfish? I laughed bitterly. You're asking me to accept that my husband impregnates his ex, watch them play house together until she dies, and then raise the baby she leaves behind. And I'm the selfish one. She's dying, Olivia. She just wants to leave something behind. And you want me to be okay with that? To pretend like this wouldn't completely wreck our marriage? You didn't even ask me how I feel about it, Daniel. You just assumed I'd go along with it. We yelled. We cried. We hurled words at each other that we could never take back. And by the time the sun came up, I had made my decision. I packed my bags. Where are you going? He asked, his voice softer now, almost scared. I'm leaving. You're really going to throw away our marriage over this? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. I think you threw it away the moment you even considered saying yes. I left that morning and went to stay with my parents. He called me, texted me, begged me to come back. But something had shifted in me that night. Something broke. And I wasn't sure it could ever be repaired. I thought leaving would be enough to make Daniel realize how insane this whole situation was. That once he saw how much it hurt me, how much it shattered the very foundation of our marriage, he'd come to his senses. But I was wrong. The texts started that same afternoon. Then the calls. At first, they were full of apologies. Please come home. I'm sorry. Let's talk. Then came the justifications. I just need you to understand why this is important to me. And finally, the accusations. You're being heartless. You don't understand my connection with Sophie. How can you turn your back on me when I need you the most? I ignored most of them. My heart was already in pieces, and I refused to let him break it even more. But then, he did something that made my blood run cold. He involved my parents. I had barely been at my childhood home for 2 days when my mother sat me down at the kitchen table, a worried expression on her face. Daniel called, she said carefully, as if bracing for my reaction. I sighed, rubbing my temples. Of course, he did. He says he just wants to talk to you. That he's willing to compromise if you just come home. I let out a bitter laugh. Compromise? Mom, he wants to father a child with his dying ex. What part of that am I supposed to be okay with? She hesitated, and that's when I knew. He had gotten to her. I'm not saying you should be okay with it, she said quickly. But maybe he's just confused. Maybe he's grieving her already, and this is his way of coping. By having a baby with her? I snapped. And expecting me to raise it after she's gone? Her face softened. Sweetheart, I'm just trying to help. You've built a life together. Maybe you should talk to him one last time before making any final decisions. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. But mostly, I just wanted to understand how my own husband had managed to turn my own family against me. Still, she wasn't wrong about one thing. I needed to talk to him. One last time. I agreed to meet Daniel in a neutral place, a quiet cafe in town where we used to go when we were dating. Maybe some part of me thought that being in a familiar place would make him remember us. What we had before Sophie came back and set fire to our marriage. He was already there when I arrived, looking exhausted. I took a deep breath and sat down across from him. You look good, he said. I mean, considering. Let's just get to the point, Daniel. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Liv, I don't want to lose you. Then stop this madness, I said simply. Tell Sophie no. His jaw clenched. I can't. Then you've already lost me. He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Liv, listen. I know this is a lot. I know it's not normal. But I love you. I want a life with you. He exhaled shakily. I owe her this. I felt the air leave my lungs. You owe her more than you owe me? It's not like that. Then tell me how it is, I challenged. He swallowed hard. She's dying, Olivia. She has no one else. And this is what she wants more than anything. If I can give her that. I don't see why I shouldn't. I shook my head. And what about me? What about our life? Our marriage? Are you seriously expecting me to just accept this? You wouldn't be alone in this, he said. We'd raise the baby together. You'd be their mother. I stared at him in complete disbelief. Are you even hearing yourself? I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You're asking me to raise your ex's child. To watch you bring a baby into the world with another woman. A woman who, let's not forget, will die, leaving me to pick up the pieces. And you expect me to be okay with that? He sat in silence, his eyes darting away from mine. So I laid out everything he refused to consider. Sophie's illness could be genetic, I pointed out. You have no idea if this child would inherit it. Even if it doesn't, pregnancy itself would be risky for her. Do you really want to be responsible for something happening to her sooner? Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line. And what about custody? I continued. Would she have legal documents saying you're the father? What if her family tries to take the baby after she dies? Or what if she decides, last minute, that she doesn't want you involved at all? Have you even thought about any of this? He shook his head. We'll figure it out as we go. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Of course. You'll just figure it out. Because that's your solution to everything, isn't it? His face darkened. Why are you making this so black and white? It's not like I'm cheating on you, Olivia. You're cheating on me, I snapped. Emotionally, at the very least. Because the moment you even considered this, you stopped being my husband. And you became hers. His shoulders slumped, but I didn't care. I was done. I grabbed my bag and stood up. I hope this is worth it, Daniel. Because after today, I'm done trying to make you see how wrong this is. His head shot up. Liv, I'm filing for divorce. I walked out before I could see his reaction. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt free. But I had no idea what was coming next. I wish I could say that after I told Daniel I was filing for divorce, he finally saw how much damage he had done. That he begged me to stay, that he realized Sophie's request had cost him his marriage, that he fought for us. But he didn't. I moved out that same week. My parents helped me pack up my things from the apartment we once called home, while Daniel barely said a word. He just stood there, watching, as if he was still trying to figure out how we had gotten to this point. As I walked out the door for the last time, I turned to him. One last chance, I thought. One last opportunity for him to stop this before it's too late. But all he said was, I hope one day you understand why I had to do this. That was it. That was his final message to me as his wife. And in that moment, I knew there was no saving this marriage. Filing for divorce was both the hardest and easiest thing I had ever done. Hard, because it wasn't supposed to end like this. We were supposed to grow old together, to face life's challenges as a team. And now I was signing papers to legally separate myself from the man I had once thought was my forever. But it was also easy, because I knew there was nothing left to fight for. Daniel didn't contest the divorce. He didn't try to stop me. He just let it happen. And that told me everything I needed to know about where I stood in his life. He had made his choice. And his choice wasn't me. Even as our marriage legally unraveled, Daniel stayed completely devoted to Sophie's plan. I heard from mutual friends that he was still spending all his time with her, that he was helping her with doctor's appointments, and, though I tried not to think about it, that they were going through with trying for a baby. Some part of me still couldn't believe it. He had thrown away our marriage, our life together, for this. And if that wasn't enough proof that I had done the right thing by leaving, what happened next sealed it. One afternoon, about a month after I had filed for divorce, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. It was from Sophie. At first, I just stared at the screen, not believing what I was reading. Then, my hands clenched around my phone as rage bubbled up inside me. I hope you're happy. You broke Daniel's heart. You destroyed a marriage just because you were too selfish to make a small sacrifice for the man you claim to love. A small sacrifice? Was she serious? You could have given him a child. You could have given me peace in my final days. But instead, you left him. For what? Your pride? Your ego? I felt sick. You're the selfish one, Olivia. Not me. And definitely not Daniel. I just hope one day you realize what you've lost. I was shaking as I read her words. Not with sadness, not with regret, but with sheer disgust. She had the audacity to blame me for this? To paint herself as the victim? I stared at the screen for a long time, debating whether or not to respond. 1,000 angry words ran through my mind. Every ounce of pain, every piece of betrayal I had swallowed, all of it was begging to be unleashed. But then I took a deep breath. And I deleted the message. Because Sophie wasn't worth my time. Neither was Daniel. I blocked the number and made a promise to myself. This was the last time I would ever allow either of them to take up space in my mind. A few weeks later, the divorce was finalized. I signed the papers without hesitation, feeling an odd sense of relief as I did. It was over. I had officially freed myself from a man who had already let me go the moment he prioritized another woman's dying wish over his own wife. And as for Sophie, I later found out, through mutual friends, because I refused to keep up with any news about them, that she had gotten pregnant. Daniel had followed through with it. That was the last thing I ever heard about them. Because from that day forward, I stopped looking back. I cut off all contact with Daniel. I stopped asking about him. I stopped checking social media, stopped wondering how things had turned out for him and Sophie. Because none of that mattered anymore. I had spent far too long mourning a marriage that was never going to survive. It was time to heal, to move forward, to start over. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I finally felt free.